evening, everybody, and welcome to the May 2019 chapter meeting for the North Central Florida AITP, Association of IT Professionals. I am Don Pizzette, chapter president. First off, I want to welcome everybody and thank you for coming out. We've actually got a great audience right here live in the studio with me, as well as our online contingent. Do bear with us. We're trying something new today. Normally, we have our in-house crowd, which is great. We have our Facebook live stream, which has been working pretty well for us. Today we're trying YouTube Live as well, so really branching out. And like any technology, we hit a few bumps there, but if you're watching on YouTube Live, welcome. If you do experience any trouble watching the stream, don't worry. We will repost this after it's edited and thrown onto YouTube for watching later on down the road. All right, a couple of announcements I want to make real quick. We are moving into summer mode here in Gainesville, and we've got May chapter meetings going on right now. We have June and July. I want to remind everybody that we're going to be taking a break in August for back to school. So these next two chapter meetings are going to be pretty exciting for us. Tonight, we've got a great speaker lined up. Dr. Ted Prince is going to be here. Before I jump into that, though, I do want to mention just a couple of things. Last month, I unfortunately was unable to attend, but we did have a phenomenal presentation. We had Rich Markow and Tom McDania, who were attorneys with Gray Robinson. They came in and graciously gave us just a wonderful presentation on a 2019 cybersecurity update. If, like me, you missed the meeting, check out our YouTube channel or the website, AITP-NCFL.org, and you can watch that one. And that's where this presentation tonight will end up as well. Many of you might remember way back at the end of last year, we won one of our competitions with AITP National, and we were awarded a $500 scholarship to in turn around an award to someone in our local community. We have been actually working with Santa Fe to be able to identify a good candidate for that scholarship. Stay tuned because you'll hear hopefully from us within the next month about who that's going to be. So that's a pretty exciting time. And it's another example of some of the work that AITP does, not just here in North Central Florida, but really across the globe. We want to encourage people to get into IT as a career field, to learn, exchange information. And one of the best ways to do that is right here at your local chapter meeting. So if you're not a member, I encourage you to check it out, join. Even if you don't become a member, feel free to come on out to our meetings. We usually spend about an hour beforehand, a chance to socialize, find out what's going on or in our community. Just between each other, you find a lot of neat ideas and hear things that different people are doing. This is a great chance to do it. All right, now most of you are not here to hear me talk because I'm just going to drone on and on. You're here to hear Dr. Ted Prince, who's going to be presenting on Am I an Innovator? So this is a really exciting one. We've got a different kind of opening slide here behind me, so I'm curious to see where this all goes. But let's welcome Dr. Prince to our chapter. All right, and I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think you all know me. I'm Ted Prince. I'm the founder and CEO of the Perth Leadership Institute. As you can tell, this is not a Brooklyn accent. I'm from Australia, but I live in Gainesville. But if you have any problems with my Australian, I have a couple of Australian speakers in the audience. They're not very good. Darren's one of them. But anyway, I'd like to thank AITP and IT Pro TV for giving me the opportunity to talk. I guess let's get on with it, right? So I get a lot of questions. Why would you want to find out whether or not you're an innovator, right? And I'm obviously going to talk about that, but I want to give you a little secret. For most of my career, I've done probably more than my fair share of innovating. But for most of my career, I didn't know I was an innovator, right? And that kind of sounds pretty stupid. But if I'd have known, I'd have probably done things very differently to how I did it, right? So that's one thing. I've also had a lot of friends and colleagues who started companies, not always, in fact, probably not mostly successfully, right? Probably because they didn't realize in many cases they weren't an innovator, or they didn't have some of the behavioral characteristics or competencies they need to be an innovator, right? So, there's practical use for for all this stuff. And of course, these days, innovation's a big deal. It's a big thing. So let's first of all talk about what is an innovator. And you'll see what I've said is an innovator is someone who implements and commercializes new ideas. Now, you probably know that when you see a lot of presentations on innovation, everyone talks about creativity, right? I get very annoyed when I hear that because as an innovator myself and having been behind many, many innovators, what I've seen is that creativity is usually an enemy of innovation. You know, creativity is a lot of ideas, but as an innovator, your job is to get things done, right? So if you start fooling around with lots of ideas, you're probably not going to do much, right? The reason I put in these two books here is I published a couple of books in China on innovation, and the reason I put them in is I've worked with a lot of innovators in China. No difference. It's the same thing there, right? So when you're working with innovators, the people who get things done are not the people who have the ideas. They're 10 a penny. The people who get things done are the ones who get things done. So that's, you know, I'm really starting off by saying that for me, innovation is about getting things done, getting things executed. It's not really so much about the idea. There's plenty of ideas around. So obviously, tech people do a lot of our innovations. Now, I want to, you know, although we're with AITP here and IT Pro, clearly it's not just IT people, right? Everyone is involved in this. We're in a digital world. It doesn't matter whether you're IT or not, you're going to be in the digital environment, right? So, you know, although I'm talking about IT people, I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. We can't, you know, sort of get mixed up here and start thinking that somehow this is only IT people. Clearly it isn't, right? Even though people like Zuckerberg, you know, got started in IT. And, you know, there are numerous sources of innovation. I'm not going to bore you with all the various sources there are, but I think the point I'm trying to get across is it doesn't matter what you're doing these days, what sort of company you've got. Every company is an IT company. You know, I've got a leadership company, and people sometimes want to ask me, well, what do you do? Blah, 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 your psychometric assessments. Actually, I spend most of my time, a lot of my time, thinking about IT because I've got many servers on Amazon. I've got servers scattered around other sites. I have to spend a lot of time thinking about that, right? Independently of the ideas behind the company. So we can have numerous sources of innovation, but actually these days, everything is digital anyway, and it doesn't matter whether you're IT. You're going to have to be IT even if you're not. So I don't know whether anyone has, my latest book I read is called Loonshots. It's really worth reading by a guy called Safi Baykal. And Loonshots are, you know, big ideas that everyone thinks you can't do, right? So he's got a whole book about this and how, you know, when you get a big idea, most people try to stop you, right? I've seen that firsthand. I think it's a very big thing. But clearly, if you're an innovator, you're going to start off thinking about some Loonshots sometime, right? So that's a good place to start, but probably most of them won't work. So I'm not trying to say you shouldn't think of Loonshots, but you know, there's a limited time range on Loonshots. Maybe you've got an Uber, maybe you can do that, but most people are not capable of doing that because of the intense economic and financial sophistication it needs to keep those things going. So I think that for most people, I call these things mini-corns. We know what a unicorn is, right? I think that for most innovators, you really need to think of mini-corns. Again, I'm not saying don't go for a unicorn, right? But I think for most people, you know, going for anything other than a mini-corn is probably not going to be realistic, right? And it also depends on your objectives as a person in your life. We're going to come to that in a moment. So again, I don't want to bore you with a catalog of my own jobs. I've had a lot of stuff, a lot of experience in IT. At one stage, for a number of years, I was the CIO for the Social Security Agency in Australia. And I ran a public company for several years in New York. And the point of putting all this down is that I think because of this, I've got a sense of what IT people are interested in, what sort of things they like. I was never particularly an IT guy. When you're running companies or you're even running a big organization, it's all about management, right? If you get too far into the weeds, you're going to fail, right? And that goes for an innovation as well. But you have to understand something about the weeds when you're with IT, right? Because that's where it's all at. And I also want to talk about innovations. I've done a number. And I can see some bad things about being an innovator, right? When you're an innovator, you've got a very warped sense of the world, right? One of the warps in your sense about the world is that you're unreasonably optimistic. That's one of the reasons I think it was a big problem I didn't learn earlier than I did, that I was an innovator, because I didn't realize, like any innovator, I'm warped, right? I have cognitive biases which make me discount risk and think things are too easy, right? If you weren't like that, you'd never do anything, right? But it's very important to understand that when you're an innovator, you have systematic cognitive biases, which mean that you see the world in very different ways to most people, but you don't know that. In fact, when I grew up and I did a lot of my innovations, I never once ever thought, boy, I'm an innovator, I want to do this. I wasn't even aware. I thought everyone was like that, right? You know, I'll give you a story. When I was in the Australian Social Security Agency, I was running the whole IT, and my boss, who was way up in the clouds, went off for an operation. Right? He had to have a medical operation. He was going to be away for 2 weeks. So, of course, this was a civil service. I got to sit in his office, right? Get paid his salary and act like a schmuckety muck, right? Because I was acting for him. So I was a young kid, and what I did at that stage was, when my time came to take over his office, I went to his office, and what did I do? I changed his office completely. It was a very big office. He had desks and no computers in those days. I changed everything around, right? Now, I've often thought, why the hell did I do that? You know, I was only there for 2 weeks. And the reason was, I wanted, you know, when you're an innovator, one of the things you want to do is break things. You want to disrupt things. I didn't do this consciously. My brain was telling me, you got to show people you're different. Poke them in the eye, right? Disrupt them. Make them regret that you're here, right? Rather like Elon Musk does with the SEC, right? You look at SEC, what is he doing with the stupid things he's saying? He's poking them in the eye, right? You don't know. If you're a real innovator, you're going to poke people in the eye, but you don't know why you're doing it. You're just going to do it, right? So, you know, this distorted reality field that you have as an innovator is a very important part of your behavioral underpinnings, right? And if you're not aware of it, going to do things, you know, I was lucky they didn't fire me. I was in the civil service, right? Probably most places would have fired me. And, you know, I went into many jobs where I innovated immediately. They didn't need the innovation. It was me who wanted it, not them. Sometimes that was good, sometimes that was bad. Anyway, to move on, we're talking about, at least at one remove, we're talking about IT people. I like the way IT people think, right? I grew up in an IT world, even though I wasn't an IT guy. What I liked, I did an undergrad and majors in languages and literature. And I always used to tell people it was total BS, right? I was learning literature. It didn't teach me anything useful at all. I spent the rest of my life unlearning everything I learned, right? I was very good at crafting stories, very good at interpretation. But, you know, when you're an IT guy, you can't do that. You write code, it's got to work. Maybe it's got bugs, right? Maybe it's got quality issues, but it's got to work. If it doesn't work, you haven't done your job right. But if you're in marketing, you can fluff it through, right? Candy floss, right? There's a lot of jobs where you can use candy floss. And if you're very articulate, you'll get a result. But with IT guys, pretty difficult to do that because in the end, the system's got to work. So I like a lot of the things about IT guys, talking about IT guys in particular, for that reason. It's not just IT guys, it's engineers, mathematicians, accountants. You know, there's a whole slew of professions here which, revolve around exactitude, right? And they're good things to have. So, when, you know, IT guys and the accountants, engineers have got a lot of things in common. But, of course, you've also got downsides, right? And again, I don't want to go into all of those things, but yeah, IT guys are not great, usually, at communications, social, interpersonal stuff, EQ, right? Blah, blah, blah. They're usually not trained in entrepreneurship or business, innovation, obviously, and political and human issues, right? So you start off, if you're an IT guy, you've got all these great exactitude stuff you've got, right? But you start off with these enormous handicaps, right? And you're not aware of them. I've seen countless IT guys go out, try to start a company and fail, right? And sometimes they were innovators, but they didn't know. They got hit by an elephant, right? When they went in, and they didn't know anything about communicating with people, or social stuff, or politics, right? Politics is a big thing for IT guys. In general, they don't get it. If you're in an organization, if you can't do that, big problem, right? And of course, if you don't have that in an organization, maybe you don't have enough political nous to do it outside when you're dealing with VCs, analysts, public company guys, and the like. That's a whole big issue in and of itself. So one of the themes is one of my themes is you really have to understand yourself, right? And most people don't understand themselves. As I said, I was at a very embarrassing old age before I realized I was an innovator. That embarrasses me to even tell people because people assume, well, I know a lot about it. I didn't know I was any of these things. I don't think I was that different to most people, right? I was probably as dumb as the next guy. So the Perth Leadership Institute, my company, has developed a set of psychometric assessments. They're very new. They're very different. But, that's what we do, and that's why I did it, because I wanted to do something different. And the things we do in our assessments, we assess your level of innovativeness. We assess your business acumen, right? Because, of course, one of the things is people don't understand if you're innovative, you've still got to make money, right? What happens if you go out and you're innovative and then you can't make money? And most people aren't going to make money, right? Most people don't even think of that, and not just IT people, pretty much anyone, actually. And, the other thing we do is assess business and communications competencies. So these are all things, not just as an IT guy, you need to understand, but as any guy wanting to get out there and start a company. So again, boring stuff. We have 3 assessments. One is a financial outcome assessment, and we use that to assess your level of innovativeness. We do another one, executive outcome assessment. It looks at your business competencies, and we've got a corporate financial assessment that looks to see how aligned or otherwise you are with your company. And I've written a couple of books on that. They've both been published in Chinese for what it's worth. So there's 3 types of innovators, and we pick these out in our tests. And we don't have time to go into the mind-numbing theory of the whole thing here. But we divide them in our test into 3 types. There's the compulsive innovators. I'm one of them. They're basically crazy. You can't rely on them, right? They're going to do something, but they're like a Musk if they've got that sort of stuff. And then you get normal people who I call the incremental innovators and the collegial innovators. Now, they're not all innovators. They just have that potential. And in order to find out whether or not they truly are able to be innovative, you actually have to assess their level of mental agility. And that's another thing, right? Because most people don't have high mental agility, right? So what I'm saying is, if you're not a crazy compulsive innovator, and most people won't be, you've got to be an incremental or a collegial innovator. But in order to do that, you also have to have high mental agility. And most people don't have that. If we all had that level of mental agility, we humans would probably have ceased to exist several billion or million years ago, right? But the idea behind this, you need to know. If you're dealing with me, you need to know that I'm a crazy compulsive innovator. If you're dealing with a collegial innovator, you need to understand that the only way he's ever going to do anything innovative is A, if he's mentally agile, which he probably isn't, and B, whether he can raise his game to go up the value-adding curve, right, which most people won't, and that he's got the necessary social motivations to make it all stick, right? So the reason for doing this is you need to know who you're dealing with. I'm going to give you a case study in a moment that will give you a good sense of why you need this. But one of the issues I've seen my clients, we do a program of our clients discovering hidden innovators. And to give you a sense, when we just look for compulsive innovators, I always tell people, give me 200 people to test. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to get 4 people. So we're going to have a lot of people who are going to fall out of this process, right? But you've got them. If you're in a larger organization, you're going to have those people. But odds on, almost 95%, you won't know who they are. And they're going to commit suicide before you find out because they'll be so frustrated. Doesn't happen with everyone, just with most organizations. And we can also, with these tests, identify the people who make money. Now, again, I've just given you a simplification of what happens, but it's no good. You can see the people who make money are the 2 guys on the left, the market makers and the profit makers. The venture capitalists don't make money. Here's the problem. Venture capitalists are probably most of your compulsive innovators. So of your compulsive innovators, most of them will not make money. But they don't know that. They don't know they have behavioral vulnerabilities, which even if they're lucky enough to be an innovator, they have no idea that they have these cognitive biases, which are systematic, which they don't understand, which are going to lead to them losing money. But it's probably the most common outcome if you are a true, real innovator. Most the problem is you have a big idea, you're visionary, right? You want to spend up. Musk, Bezos in the beginning. I mean, I'm sure you all know people like that, right? You're going to lose money. And by the time you've lost it, you're going to be out of business, right? Which is very often what happens. So the issue is here, and I often get asked this question, can anyone be an innovator? And the answer is, in principle, yes. In principle, yes. But most of those innovators won't be compulsive, right? They won't be crazy. They won't be madmen. It's the madmen you really want to get most things started, right? Not always, and a good innovator, a good compulsive innovator can be very good at hiding the fact that he's a crazy, right? Because if he didn't hide it, he would never get a job. No one would ever hire him or never, including the venture capitalists, because they want, I ran a public company. People want a responsible person, someone they view as responsible. So if you're an innovator, you're not responsible. So you really need to know that sort of stuff. Now, many other people can be innovators, but you've got to have the mental agility. So how do I know if you're mentally agile? Can I ask you? Of course not. Number one, you don't know, right? You have no idea whether you're agile or not. Number two, if you don't think you're agile, you're not going to tell me. You're going to hide it. If you're doing a test, you'll try to game it. So there's a lot of issues with agility. But you're going to have some people. We see people who are very agile, who are not compulsive innovators. The only way you're going to find out is testing them. And the tests you have got to be very cunning, right? Because people are not so much cunning, but they game everything, right? Because people are always looking for the result that will make them look the best. When we developed our assessments, we had to spend an inordinate amount of time just on those issues, right? Everyone games everything, right? It's a natural part of human evolution. You will all do it. I will do it. So in order to get to, peel back those, the shells of the onion, you've got to be pretty cunning about that too. So I want to just give you a few, maybe we've got some wannabe innovators looking at this or some compulsive innovators. So I want to just give you a few things. These are purely at random that over my career I've seen have been very important. And these may be particularly important with IT people, right? One of the things is you need a story. I mean, if you're in this game, you probably know it. But if you go to a VC or anyone, an angel, and try to sell them on a product, in most cases, maybe they'll get it. But, you've got to tweak people's heartstrings, not their logic, right? People really invest usually on emotion rather than logic. And if you don't pay attention, IT guys, of course, are all about code. So they're not about stories. You'll often find that IT guys or engineers do have a systematic problem. And their systematic problem is they see a story as being trying to manipulate people, a purveyor of an untruth, right? IT guys, engineers, accountants are very sensitive to people trying to manipulate other people. They see it as being a problem, right? But, life is life, humans are humans, and psychology is psychology, right? You got to sell something. A lot of IT guys, and it's not just IT guys, product guys, view selling and sales as being something dirty. I got very annoyed. I taught intrapreneurship at UF for a number of years. And one of the things I got really pissed off with when I went in, and I had a number of talks with the faculty about it, I said to them, you're teaching intrapreneurship. Nowhere do you teach anything about sales. Nothing happens without a sale. You're sending all these entrepreneurs out there. You're telling them to start a company. They don't know the first thing about making a sale. And the reason is academics see sales as being something dirty. It's something that's not academic, right? And, the students pick up on that. It's something I shouldn't touch, right? Big problem. So it's not just a question of getting sales skills or trying to act extroverted. You've got to get people past this mental hurdle that they view they're dealing with the mafia or something like that, right? Another issue. Number one, your IT guys generally are not good communicators, but even if they are, there's a very widespread feeling, that when you have an innovation, you should start communicating. You should start promoting it. Usually the worst thing, right? Particularly if you're in a large organization. You're painting a big X on your back, right? Please kill me. Please get rid of my innovation, right? So I won't threaten you, right? But the problem is when you have big companies in particular, not just big companies, everyone wants to say, well, I got this, I'm very smart. I've got this big innovation. I want everyone to know about it. And it's not just in large organizations. It's outside the organization. You alert competitors to it. You get people competing you maybe years before they otherwise would have done. I've done a lot of work with one very large global company, Looking for hidden innovators, and we call the internal program under the radar, right? And the idea was that no one was allowed to talk about it. Actually, the safest bet you have, if you're inside an organization and you've got an innovation, don't tell your boss, right? It's usually the kiss of death, because if the boss gets involved, you're already introducing things into the equation which aren't good for the innovation. Maybe someone doesn't like the boss. Maybe the boss has got cognitive biases, which say it's a bad idea. Maybe he just doesn't know, right? I mean, there can be a variety of things. So the idea is keep it simple. I make my, does anyone know John le Carre, the spy story guy? Yeah, John le Carre, right? Well, you know how John le Carre, everything always gets out. And what you do is, if you want to keep things secret, you have cells, right? I was in the diplomatic service for a while, so I'm very sensitive to this. So when you have helpers, you get collaborators. But the very first thing is you have to learn is don't ever, ever, ever tell anyone who your collaborators are, right? Because then they can pick them off too, right? You need to have cells, just like John le Carre or spies of the CIA does. Otherwise, the enemy will pick them off, right? Big issue. Act like a founder, right? Personal branding, very important. A disproportionate number of people, innovators, are introverts, right? Disproportionate number. Most of the time, they hate putting themselves out. They hate personal branding because they view it as being a manipulative thing. IT people are even worse in general, not always. So, one of the big things is, what sort of personal branding am I going to adopt? How do I do that? And it's not just something I write down. What about my body language, my facial expressions, right? There's a whole series of things that you need to look at. Get an executive defender, right? If you do tell people, get someone big and humongously ugly and scary, you can keep people at bay, because, if you're inside an organization and you do something, the immune system will quickly spring into action and get rid of you, right? So very important to have some good executive defenders when you get to that point. And Darren, my friend Darren, has started a company with a partner, and I always tell people getting a partner increases your odds astronomically. We've done a lot of research on this. If you start a new company, you're an introvert, get an extrovert, or vice versa. There can be another thing, and you have to marry that person. I don't mean marry in the traditional sense, but you have to be in like a professional marriage situation. And if you don't, it's not that you'll fail, it's just that you've maybe got an 85% chance of failure compared to if you had that partner. And the last thing is, it's obvious, but we're talking about IT guys here, or accountants or whatever, right? Passion. What I've seen in my life is, if you want someone to do this sort of stuff, you've got to have fire in your belly, right? You're going to be doing this stuff. You get into something, you're not going to be doing it for 3 weeks. Maybe you're going to be doing it for 10 years. And in that 10 years, you're going to be 24/7, right? And if you can't do it 24/7, you don't have the fire in your belly. You're not, if your wife comes along and says, we need this weekend, you're probably going to have to say no. And if you're not prepared to do that, I mean, a lot of people don't like that, but if you don't do that, you probably reduce your chances by 80 or 90%. So that fire in the belly is very important. And you can pick that up pretty quickly. Can you meet, if someone comes to you, can you meet me on Sunday, right? 9 o'clock, right? Blah, blah, right? So a case study. No, I never dealt, this is Bill Gates when he was young, right? So I never coached him or anything. But the reason I mention that, one of the assignments I did for a large company to discover hidden innovators, I found a guy who kind of looks like Gates, but he was Japanese and he lived in Japan. And the reason I mention him is when I told people that he had come up on my radar screen in the test, so only very few people come through, they all said, Ted, you're a wacko. This guy, there is no way he's an innovator. He was an accountant. He was working in the legal department, very introverted, very inarticulate, but he was an innovator, and later development showed that very clearly. Now, even in his company, where he'd been for like 15 years, no one knew, right? And usually when you ask people, look, I get this often, Ted, go out and test some people for us. But we don't want to pay you for 200 people. Let's see if we can strip it down to 100. So I say, well, if you did 100 or 50, who would you pick? They say, look, we want you just to do the marketing guys, right? Because the marketing guys are always more innovative, which incidentally is BS, right? You will get them everywhere. And actually, the most surprising ones will be the introverts who never talk, who are very inarticulate, have got zero social skills, and have clammed up because they know they're not going to get a good reception, right? They get fired or they decided there's nowhere else for them to do. So you can't assume, what I tell people is most large organizations don't want to hire innovators, right? Most times when you've got these hidden biases in your interview process. If someone looks innovative, they're probably going to reject them because the guy's going to be a crazy. He's going to say stupid things, right? And if you're not an innovator, you don't want some disruptive SOB under you who's going to be telling you all these uncomfortable. You just want the job done, right? So you have to recognize that companies, particularly large companies, but not just large companies, all companies are basically machines to kill innovators, right? And they do it in a variety of very sophisticated ways, the most sophisticated of which is the HR process for hiring and onboarding people. That's when you get rid of most innovators. Now, occasionally, you'll make a mistake, and you'll let one in because he hides it from you, or you don't pick up the cues. Then, if he's a compulsive innovator, two things. He'll either leave later and form his own company, or he'll stay and give up. He'll commit ritual harikari in your company. Maybe does the work he's supposed to do, but certainly nothing to do with innovation, presuming that's something you want. So I'm talking to people who are in IT now who might want to know whether they're innovators, and they might say to me, well, why would I want to know? And I would say, well, you might want your own company, or you might be in a company and do an internal startup or a new product for your company. You might want to do a mini-corn, right? Your aim isn't to make a lot of money. Your aim is to have a nice life. When you have your own company, you probably don't have a boss. You can take time off when you need it, right? So for a lot of IT guys, a lot of people, we have this idea that, because of Musk and the like, that you go for a unicorn, but there are other models, right? And actually, most innovators or even semi-innovators are probably going to be more suitable for the mini-corn where you have a nice life. You have a lifestyle objective, not a money objective. Maybe you're not making much money, but that may be better than answering to a boss every day. So what do you have to do to figure out whether or not you're an innovator and then do something? And the first thing is you need a behavioral assessment. Of course, I'm special pleading here, right? This is self-serving. We have assessments. we will do the job, and we'll figure it out. The only thing is, you may not like the result, but the result will be very accurate, right? And if you want help, then you can do that. And we can also figure out what behaviors you don't have that you need to learn or develop or something. And the other thing is, how agile are you, right? It's a big issue. You know, we do a lot of work with large companies, and we found one big thing. In our testing, we found that CEOs, even the very large companies, are no more likely to have high business acumen than the people at the bottom of the woodpile. But there is one big difference we found. The big difference we found with CEOs, no matter what their level of innovativeness, is they're agile in general. Now, there may be some family companies, for example, where they're not. They go down on their dad's coattails or something. But agility is a very important thing. And if you have it, there's a lot of stuff you can do it. There's another thing. If you have an innovator, you find someone, either compulsive or one of the other innovators, you need an activation step. Now, this sounds really dumb, but I can tell you it's true. You have to give people permission. You would think, Ted, well, Musk never asked permission. Maybe he didn't. But, most of the innovators I've seen, you need to give them an activation stop. I've seen it a number of times. Well, I'm an innovator. Can I do it? You say yes. But am I going to be allowed to? Yeah. But you need that to come from somewhere. Maybe it doesn't come from me. Maybe it comes from his wife or his dad or his mother or something, right? But you need an activation step. And that activation step is usually missed because we have this image of innovators as being these heroes like Musk, who are truly amazing, right? They just go off and do it, but most innovators are like that, not like that. And if they don't have the activation step, they may do it, it'll just be 20 years later, right? Because they always figured, well, I'm not the right guy, I don't have the right background, no one ever gave me any encouragement or support. And then maybe 20 years later, they're so frustrated with the company, they do it anyway, but they've lost 20 years. That happens a lot. And you've got to get a handle on innovation dynamics. Now, I've listed some of those there, and I don't want to bore you with them. But one of the big innovation dynamics, has anyone read Catch-22? Remember, yeah, okay, another, right. But I don't know if you remember, I think it's Yassarian. They drive these bombers, right? They fly these bombers. I think it might be Milo Minderbeiner in a bomber. Says something like, I don't want to go. And he says, well, why don't you want to go? And I think it might be Yassarian says, Milo says, well, they're trying to kill us, right? They're trying to kill us. And the other guy says, well, yeah, duh. Wake up and smell the coffee. I mean, that's what they're trying to do. You've got to realize the same thing if you're an innovator in a company, right? Everyone is trying to kill you. They may not say that. In fact, in most companies, everyone will say, we want innovation. But not true. Not true. And it's not willful. People may not realize it's not true. There may be some very good reasons why they don't want to sponsor innovation. But how many big companies are there where everyone says we want to do innovation, right? It's all bullshit, right? They don't want innovation at all because it will rock the boat. And rocking the boat is not a good thing. So if you're going to advise someone to go into that lion's den, you've got to give them some of the tools of the trade, how not to be killed, right? Because otherwise they're going to kill you. They'll kill you nicely without you even knowing it, right? Because they're older, they're more politically savvy, right? Most innovators are not politically savvy, particularly at the beginning. By the time they get it, they've already been killed, right? So who do we do this for? I think I told you that the main thing we do are hidden innovator programs. We do mental agility programs for the incremental innovators. We do it with individuals and virtual incubator programs. So all around the same kind of theme. And so the vision we have of working with companies, we can help you unleash some of these people who otherwise wouldn't be discovered or who would leave in desperation. And you can use us as a venture catalyst. What I often tell people, this is going back, but the current model of innovation is that anyone can be an innovator. All you got to do is show them the right process and they will be an innovator. Take them to an off-site meeting, show them how to be creative, form a team, right? Does it work? Of course not, right? If it worked, General Motors would be SpaceX, right? And it isn't. So the idea is you don't get innovation without innovators. They don't have to be compulsive. They've got to be innovators. And if you don't look at that message, you're going to end up giving innovation projects to articulate, highly educated, smart people who are not going to be there when the going gets rough because they don't have the fire in their belly. Or they're too educated, which is another problem. So that's my massage. What do we do, Don?
All right.
Oh, yeah, there's my contact.
Well, first off, thank you for the presentation. That was really engaging and entertaining. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we do want to take some time to do some questions and answers from the audience, questions from the audience, answers for you, hopefully.
Give answers as well.
I have the portable mic. I'll kind of walk around as everybody has questions, and I'll start us off with a quick question, which is, let's say that I'm not an innovator. So I'm just not. Should I be striving to become an innovator, or is it fine to just stay at that where I'm at in life or whatever?
Well, you skewered me from the get-go because that's the biggest single issue. You get a lot of people because they're who are wannabes, right? They've been encouraged by the media. They read every day about innovators. So you have to figure it out. And it becomes a coaching thing. And I think the question you have to ask people in that case is, what is your life goal? Right? That's probably more important than, are you an innovator or not? And then if someone says, look, I do want to be an innovator, but they're not a compulsive innovator, you've got to go, okay, here are your odds. If you're one of the other guys, you've got a 30% chance of making it. Are you prepared to put the work in? Right? So, not a perfect answer, but it's a very good question.
But it all starts with establishing your own goals.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, start, as the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People says, start with the end in mind. And I have a lot of people coming to me and they say, I want to be an innovator. I always ask them, look, I've got 2 questions. Do you want to be a CEO or not? Because that immediately tells you something. And then, what do you want to do? What do you want to be when you're 80? Let's figure that out first. Then let's work backwards from there.
Well, I know for me personally, I don't want to be a CEO, and when I'm 80, I want to be retired. So that's my got my goals laid out. Well, let's go to the audience. Anybody have any questions?
Can you define further what you mean by mental agility?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Darren. When we do our tests for business acumen, what we're really measuring is your behavioral propensity to create capital. Is it high or is it low? Now, for most people, it will be low. And there are cognitive drivers behind that, which we can identify. Right? When you do that, really your behavioral propensity to create capital, you've all got one. I can measure it all, right, for all of you. I can even probably tell a little about your behavioral propensity just from looking at you, right? Now, when you do that, the behavioral propensity to create capital is actually your preferred way of creating value. You have a way of creating, everyone has got an innate way they prefer to create value. And that comes from pre-existing cognitive biases, which are probably, not totally certainly, but probably hardwired. Right? Now, you can't change those innate biases, but you can change the way they're expressed. Now, for most people, even the expression of those biases is kind of hard-coded. You know, I'm a cheapskate, right? So that's what I am. I want to be a cheapskate. I prefer doing that because whenever I have to buy anything, it gives me a way to act, be a cheapskate. But what if you go into a company and they're all extravagant, right? Can you change your expression so that you're agile enough not to puke every time you are extravagant, right? That's it. Now, we can measure that. And what we can show you is that probably, you know, I could talk all day about this, probably 50% of people have a level of mental agility that is not enough to overcome that particular barrier, right? They'll act that way or a little bit that way, but they won't change. Maybe about 10% could go the whole hog and suddenly look like they're a big spender, even if they're not. And they can act the part. In other words, they're good actors, but they can do it with their decisions. So I'm using this with the behavioral propensity to create capital. But there's a particular cognitive bias when you're measuring innovativeness. And that particular cognitive bias is what we call the status quo bias. How wedded are you to the status quo? Now, I'm the opposite. I'm not wedded to the status quo. I want to break the status quo, right? So our way of expressing that is I have a high value adding driver, right? And that means that when I invent a product, it tends to get very high gross margins. So to come back to your question, right, I've got a low status quo bias. Let's say I get someone with a high status quo bias who doesn't like change, right? And I say to him, Joe, you're low value adding. We want you to invent a new way of flying next week, right? Now, the guy could lie or cheat or something, but, you know, what you're looking for is for the guy or gal to ape the behaviors of a compulsive innovator. So it's kind of hard to go north, right? Some people can do it, and we see people all the time who can do it. But you have to use, the social workers would call this cognitive behavioral therapy. But you can test people and find out what they are, but most people are resistant to that level of change. And you have to get them in coaching. And then, of course, you got to get them in a situation in coaching where they feel happy about changing, right? Does that meet your, I get the impression you're looking for something else. No? Okay.
You didn't mention anything about risk-taking. A lot of people are very averse to risk and making a long-term investment in an idea, and they have to have constant feedback on anything that they do.
That's absolutely right, Tony. And in fact, I talk a lot about this. I talked about value adding or the status quo bias. If you're high status quo bias, you don't like change. So you don't like risk. If you're an innovator, you like risk. I like risk. Now, that's a vulnerability too, right? Because I'm going to take you into places where you may get killed. But if you don't take that risk, no reward, right? So yes, actually, one of the implications of this is risk management in large companies, particularly public companies. You know, there's risk management in all large companies. Most compliance regimes for risk management are process-based. They're not behaviorally-based. So what people will do, they'll give you a checklist and you check them all up. We're low risk. But maybe you've got a till of the hump running the company. No one ever measures that, right? So actually, strong innovators, compulsive innovators, are risk takers. They're huge risk takers. It's one of the vulnerabilities, and that's one of the reasons I wish, when I was younger, someone would take me aside and said, "Ted, I want to tell you a few truths about yourself. You're an innovator, means you take risks, and that means there are going to be these situations where no one's ever going to hire you because they're going to be too scared." They would have been right. I never knew to avoid those situations because I never knew. And if you're a 28-year-old IT guy, you have zero idea, right? And by the time you find out, maybe you've been fired 3 times, right? You know, it was all the innovativeness is being knocked out of you. So you're absolutely right. The risk is another part of that. And it's actually the higher your VA, the higher your risk propensity.
Can one develop a degree of to teach themselves to be an innovator? Let's say that you don't want to necessarily come out of the box and be a CEO, but you want to grow into something.
You want to
grow into something like
Right.
there are like degrees or levels of innovativeness that you can strive for to as you go up the chain.
How do you do it?
Yeah, is there a process to do that? I mean, can you actually start small and grow, or is it all in or all out?
Well, you know, I think there's a variety of things. I taught entrepreneurship at UF for several years, right? And that's not a bad start, except, of course, the problem is you're not doing it yourself. It's an academic exercise. I do a lot of mentoring and coaching, right? And one of the things I always tell people is it's like coming from a big company. I always tell small companies, there's 2 people you should never hire. Never, ever hire a big company person. Never, ever hire a PhD, right? And the reason is the big company guys never had to do it on their own. They never had to kill their own dinner. They never had to make a sale, right? They never had to pay themselves out of a sale, right? And the big company guys are not used to, they're always in a team which covers up their vulnerabilities. So I think there's a certain amount you can do by reading stuff and getting coaching. But, you know, there's nothing like the real thing. So I think either you've got to get into a small company that's doing that, or maybe you're in a big company which is willing to cater to you and give you a shot at something. Some big companies do that. Skunk Works or something like that.
Dr. Prince, thank you very much. I've enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
There's a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. And I'm wondering if innovation is at heart or at base what occurs to a person when they're facing dire circumstances or really want to improve themselves. Do you feel that that's a reasonable genesis of what you're talking about?
Well, is going to Mars a necessity? You see what I'm getting at. And the Loonshots are usually not a necessity, right? Usually what pulls people in is the emotional attraction of the vision, right? That's why I suggested it, right? I think you have to often, I mean, look at when Bezos is doing the whole Blue Origin thing, right? He started off with retail, right? Now, you might have said when Bezos started off that retail needed something, right? Like online stores, books and stuff like that. But I don't think anyone would ever said then that you needed a Loonshot to get to Mars. But I think that, and I think it's one of the problems when you have IT guys or engineers doing these things, they often miss the emotional component. And what I've learned, I've seen many occasions when investors have invested in really big, to my mind, stupid ideas when they wouldn't invest in smaller ideas. And it wasn't because it was a necessity. It moved them in some way. I don't think you can, that's why I think the book, The Loonshots, is a good book. It's not saying you should do them. It's just saying most Loonshots fail. And most people will do everything they can to make them fail. But Loonshots are what motivate a lot of humanity, right? I mean, what happened when, was it Queen Isabella of Spain? Was it her who backed Columbus? Right? He came to her and said, I'm going to find this strange land that no one's ever seen. And her advisors told them they're all going to die going there. Right? Which they did, right? 9 out of 10 ships sank or something. But she still invested, right? So, yeah.
Earlier you had mentioned like reading or getting coached to help kind of eliminate some of that hardwired cognitive bias. Have you ever heard of untraditional methodologies such as subconscious training to execute that?
Well, I think that these days, cognitive behavioral therapy is making a comeback. I've got some doubts about it, but it's making a comeback. I don't know if you've heard of NLP. Have you heard of NLP? Anyone heard of NLP? Sorry? It's natural language processing. Is it? Neuro-linguistic neuro-linguistic programming, right? Right. I think that's a very underrated thing. And the reason it's underrated, it's not taught in any university courses. So people see it as being like old wives stuff, but actually it's very good. And you might have heard, Tony, you might have heard this, that one of the propositions, which is incredibly insightful, most people still don't understand it, of NLP, is the aphorism, the response is the message, right? The response is the message, right? When someone comes back to you, they're actually feeding back the message you just gave to them, right? So I think there's some other non-traditional things. And I think what's happened, the emergence of behavioral finance and economics now stress unconscious cognitive biases, which traditional economics and finance have never done. So if you understand those, it push you a long way ahead. But then you got to realize you got to have tools to handle it, because what it's really saying is what most people are thinking and doing is not based on conscious behavior, right? We know that when you make a decision like moving your hand, we know that you've already made that decision to move your hand a few milliseconds before you actually move it, right? So the decisions you make that result in actions have actually been predetermined by your mind. You just think you willed the thing, actually, but you had some unconscious process going on there which intervened before you thought of it, right? Now that's interesting.
Any other questions?
Okay. Thanks, Don.
Well, on behalf of the local chapter, thank you for coming out and presenting. We really enjoyed having you. And, for everybody, I guess I can put that down.
Sure.
For everybody else here in attendance, thank you guys for coming out. I do want to remind everybody that's out there in TV land, you are more than welcome to come on out and attend our chapter meetings. We do these things every month. It's a lot of fun. You can always see when our next one is at AITP-NCFL.org. Our next month chapter meeting, we actually don't have a speaker lined up just yet. We have a couple that are tentative, so I can't announce what our topic is going to be. But we are always on the lookout for other speakers. So if you yourself or someone you know would be a good speaker at our local chapter meeting, please shoot us an email at info@AITP-NCFL.org. We'd love to hear you there. But otherwise, I think that's going to wrap us up. So
Thanks, Tom.
Dr. Prince, thanks again.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody.